You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
We'll try to spice it.
Who art Ed? Mr. Wood art Ed me.
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, where we explore visual arts in an audio medium. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and joining me today, I have the host of another arts podcast. I have Nathan from Postmodern Art Podcasts. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You want to tell our listeners a little bit about your show? Because if you're listening to this, you might be interested in the Postmodern Art Podcast.
I would absolutely love to talk about the podcast. My name is Nathan Ragland. I am the host of the Postmodern Art Podcast, the podcast dedicated to giving artists who are wowing the world over the platform they deserve. I bring on some of the best artists today all around the internet of all different mediums of art, animation, digital, traditional, music, film, whatever you want to listen. I more or less give them the platform that I feel like they deserve.
I absolutely love that about your show because, you know, my show has sort of a similar bent. I try to celebrate art in all of its forms, from traditional paintings and drawings we might see in the museums to maybe some things that should be in the museums, like Mario.
Yeah, you know what? That's a very valid point.
And so today we're going to be talking about a postmodern artist, a contemporary artist named Weiwei. I gotta say, this is one that when we first started talking about, like, who should we discuss on the show? Host a postmodern art podcast. I wanted it to be postmodern. I wanted it to be more contemporary. But this is an artist I'd heard of, and he's been on my list for a long time, and I've avoided him for a long time.
Ooh.
Because some of his stuff early on, I just looked at it and I was like, huh, what's that all about? But the more I look at and the more I've researched, you know, it's like everything else. The more you research, the more you learn, the more you see to appreciate. So Ai Weiwei has done some interesting things over his life and led a very interesting life.
To say the least.
Yeah. He was born, from what I understand, probably August 28th, 1957 in Beijing, China. Some sources will say mid-May. And the only reason I can think of why that would have been is, like, when we're thinking of 1950s Beijing, you know, I mean, that's the time of Mao and everything, right? Like, there's a lot of social upheaval, a lot of stuff going on with the state that maybe record keeping wasn't the top priority for, you know, every little baby that was born in those days.
Or if it was a top priority, more or less, it was a priority to make themselves look better for some reason, which I don't know why records of births, like, depending on a different day, would make a country look better. But, you know, we live in a different country, so I don't think we can really judge that much.
Yeah, but his father, Ai Ching, hopefully got that close to correct. He was a poet, a fairly prominent poet, but in what will be becoming sort of a recurring motif, he was not always on great terms with the people in charge in China. The Communist Party officials accused Ai Weiwei's father, Ai Ching, of being on the wrong side politically. Like, sort of, he was accused of being a rightist, if you will, a sort of right. And so the family was exiled from Beijing. It seems like they were, from what I understand, and, you know, Chinese geography is not my forte, it looks like they were in a relatively remote sort of rural area in the north, and they were able to return to Beijing in 1976 at the end of the Cultural Revolution.
Right. I can just only imagine what seeds these potential events could be planting for our protagonists of today's story.
I have no idea. No sort of foreshadowing there whatsoever.
None whatsoever.
So 1978, he goes to the Beijing Film Academy. It wasn't, I guess, the best fit for him. He was more into the avant-garde art scene because, you know, through the lens of hindsight, it would just seem obvious. In 1981, he left China for the U.S. because every great artist has to go through New York at some point if they want to be seriously taken on the world stage. So he studies at Parsons. He started in painting, then he moved on to sculpture. He's inspired by ready-mades, sort of like Duchamp, fountain, all of that sort of stuff.
That was the person that I instantly thought of whenever I saw ready-mades, because that's if I was to list my personal favorite artist, Marchamp is probably the top for me. So whenever I saw ready-mades, I'm like, okay, major influence, got it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very big influence on a lot of work. I mean, Duchamp's fountain, as I discussed in a previous episode, was named the most influential work of the 20th century, and for good reason. So 1993 is when he returned to Beijing. His father was ill, and this is where he starts exploring Chinese culture in its traditional roots along with the modernization. One of the things I find really interesting, because people who are familiar already with Ai Weiwei and his personal narrative and fame today would probably be scratching their heads like, why did he go back to China? Because, spoiler alert, he's been on bad terms with the government in China. He was imprisoned for quite some time. He made a heavy metal music video dramatizing his imprisonment and his incarceration. So he's been doing a lot of stuff, but he has been sort of a thorn in the side of the Chinese government. I mean, to understand just how much of a thorn in their side, his name is a blocked search term on Chinese social media.
Yeah, that was something that whenever I saw that fact, like, that surprised me, as well as the heavy metal song. I mean, the fact that, he left China, was more than willing to come back and do all this stuff and be such a prominent presence for that government, especially with how much they like to control everything. But yeah, he's still able to like express himself as much as he did. I just got nothing but respect for this guy.
I know. I mean, guts of steel right there. Like I could not do that. And part of the reason that I guess he did was in that 1993 trip when he came back to take care of his sick father. Mm-hmm. I guess his father's final wish for him, or words to him, were to think of China as his home. And he didn't mean that in the sense of like, think of your deep, cultural identity in China, because Ai Weiwei doesn't actually consider himself to be a Chinese artist, an artist that's all about Chinese culture. He thinks of himself as an artist who is Chinese. But he took his father's advice to think of China as his home as sort of like a permission structure to make himself at home and be comfortable in who he is, his authentic self, even in that land where a lot of things were being censored and things like that.
I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like, especially whenever it comes to your home, that is the place that you should feel most comfortable with. And if there's something wrong with it, you want to be that change in order to make it as comfortable as a place that you want to be more than anything else. So if Ai Weiwei sees something in his home that just doesn't really stick well with him, he's going to do what he can in order to make it the best place possible.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's the narrative we see playing out, and that seems to be the way he's taken it. I guess I can't relate to it because I am like, I have never been comfortable any place in any time ever.
Okay.
I work in awkwardness the way my contemporaries work in oils or clay. But I guess he's cool with who he is, and he is comfortable being who he is, even in a nation that has not always been so comfortable with that.
Right.
And speaking of discomfort, this is one of those things that I really have a hard time reading about and even recounting. One of the things he was famous for in 1995, he took a Han Dynasty urn. And think like Han Dynasty, we're talking like 2,000 years ago. The Han Dynasty was from around 200 BCE to 220 AD or CE, depending on how you want to count it. He smashed a 2,000-year-old vase, just like he did like a piece where they took a series of photographs of him just dropping and smashing that vase, which you know, I on some level, I think is an interesting conceptual piece about, you know, the way we value things and what we're doing with it and all that. But
Right. I mean, it goes back to more or less what we were talking about with like the home thing, more or less, like taking this this thing that a lot of people like almost worship at this point when it comes to like the Han Dynasty or whatnot, and just making people realize, hey, this is great to learn from more than anything else, but like also like we need to be moving forward and like keeping and worshiping stuff like this should not be the thing that defines us more than anything else.
yeah, and I mean, as somebody who, I think for me, the problem with it is I always hate to see someone destroying someone else's art. Something that someone else made, but I think it's probably more like you were saying, that cultural artifact that's so valuable because it's old. Let's face it, that's why it's valuable. It's because it's old, you know?
I mean, I don't know the context of the urn or the vase itself, like, you know, what it held, like who made it or whatnot. But like, if it was just some like random vase that they found that was based around that Han Dynasty, like for all you know, that could have been, you know, some peasant that just made it just to make their house look good. Like, while again, the cultural impact and the cultural history of it is valuable, and it can break anyone's heart, especially like admiring the history and the fact that it lasted this long. The fact that, especially when it comes to like how the history has kind of defined the Chinese culture, and like how they kind of use that to try to let people know, hey, we should stick with like the traditions of this. This is how we need to do this and that and that and that. I see what I was going for with this.
Yeah, like I say, it's an interesting conceptual piece. On some level, it pains me, but I get what he's doing. He is looking at the Chinese culture, traditional roots, along with modernization. You know, that was not the only like Han Dynasty urn that he did something with. He also painted a Coca-Cola logo on one. He took like antique furniture and broke it apart, then rearranged the pieces into something completely useless, which feels like something Duchamp would have done too.
Yeah. I just want to at least say like the Coca-Cola one more than anything else. That is just like, you know, we talked about like the heavy metal song. That is just like a punk rock move right there. Like taking that tradition, plastering on commercialism or whatnot to prove a point.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like that phase where, you know, the punk rock bands were adorning themselves in ties and other signifiers of serious high status people, you know, like sort of undercutting those symbols by, you know, appropriating them and everything like that. And I think that's kind of interesting. And like I say, he kind of made his name in the 90s doing that type of work. He became really well known. The Beijing Olympics, at least like on the global stage, the Beijing Olympics 2008, he was sort of designing the stadium, which high profile gig. The stadium was commonly referred to as the Bird's Nest, but I love that the actual inspiration was a toilet seat, and he's like very upfront about that.
That's something I didn't even realize until I saw this, because I didn't realize he was the one that designed it more than anything else. Which, considering all the stuff that we talked about that he did back in the 90s, the fact that the Chinese government would turn to him and be like, hey, we need you to present something that is going to represent how amazing our country is to the entire global audience. That is like, I don't know if they just didn't learn from the past or whatnot, but the fact that they allowed him to do it and still make such a large political statement with what he made is it's just incredible.
I know. And it's one of those things like you once you see it, you can't unsee it. But again, like nerves of steel, this guy's got to have ice water running through his veins, because you see, he also, like, while he was in the US, I guess he was just like quietly a top rated blackjack player. Like, he would be, from what I understand, he was like comped all over the place. Like, they would send a limo from Atlantic City to New York to pick him up to play in blackjack tournaments and stuff like that. Just like, this dude is doing all of the things in a really, you know, sophisticated, high level, high stakes way. And I don't know. It's the kind of thing that if I were reading about it in a novel, I would be like, no, it's too far. You're putting a hat on top of a hat here.
You go.
But he's doing it.
It just immediately, just like in this little conversation that we've had just with this alone and seeing like the notes and such, he is already one of the coolest people I know. Not just one of the coolest artists, one of the coolest people I have ever heard about.
I know. Like he should be doing ads for whatever that Dos Equis or whatever. But I guess after the break, we'll come back and we will get a little bit into one of his specific pieces. And so now we're going to talk about the sunflower seeds. I'm not going to try the correct pronunciation here. In 2010, he created an installation of 100 million hand-painted porcelain sunflower seeds. And
how long do you think he was working on, like, just thinking about that alone? It's not just 100 million like sunflower seeds, hand-painted porcelain sunflower seeds. How long do you think he was working on that before he was actually able to present it?
Well, like so many contemporary artists, he's not doing the drudge work with a lot of stuff. He hired 1,600 workers to craft all of those seeds. I think this was actually during his detention period.
Ooh.
It was like right around that time. So he's got like a massive labor force, but even with 1,600 workers making 100 million seeds, you're still talking each of them crafting like 62,500 seeds. I did the math on it. Like that's a lot. And getting into this, like he's making them with porcelain as in some ways sort of a callback to what he was doing before with those like Han Dynasty vases and everything like that. He's using the materials that China was known for traditionally. I mean, if you don't know much about China and Chinese art and everything like that, like one of the first things you learn about is like, oh, Chinese, the Ming vases and stuff. Like China has a long history with wonderfully handcrafted porcelain sculptures and everything like that.
Right.
So he's using that traditional fine material, but making sunflower seeds. And I don't know about you, but growing up, I always would choose sunflower seeds, especially like during Little League baseball games and stuff like that. Like it was that kind of thing where, you saw the pro ball players were chewing something and spitting it out, and it's like, okay, that's what we'll do, and we'll pretend that we're, and I guess Ai Weiwei, like when he was a kid in China, like that was a treat for them. He and his friends would share sunflower seeds and stuff like that, because again, China in the 1950s, especially in rural areas, there was some scarcity, not always living high off the hog there, not always having access to all the things that maybe we take for granted.
Right.
And getting into, because this is just so loaded with so many levels of symbolism,
to say the least.
Yeah. The Communist Party under Mao, they used the sunflower, as a symbol for their propaganda. They would talk about Mao as the sun and the people as sunflowers turning towards the leader. And so again, he's making these personal connections, but also the societal connections, and in some ways appropriating or taking on the imagery of the state as a means to sort of subvert it.
Right. I think I've seen at least like a handful of these like propaganda pieces, like here and there. Like I can't now off the top of my head, I can't think of a specific one, but like honestly, when it comes to trying to portray yourself as this like benevolent, like all-knowing, like everything is gonna be okay through me leader, like conveying yourself as the sun and as the people as like the sunflowers or whatnot, that is a very strong message that is really interesting to use that. Like, it's interesting that that's the direction they went, but it also like makes the most sense, honestly.
Yeah. And so now, because I have talked so much about this, I want to get your reactions to this piece. Do you have an image of the work?
I do have an image of this sunflower seeds piece, and my God, like I just like right off the bat, like just seeing this right off the bat, I wouldn't even think that they look like sunflower seeds. I thought it looked like gravel for like half a second, but then you get like the close up shot of the seeds themselves, and I wouldn't think that it was an art piece. I would think that someone just like it was like a like one time piece of seeing like people like scattering sunflower seeds on the ground or whatnot, or just putting this like pile of sunflower seeds or whatnot to convey that point. But the fact that like it's there, it looks so realistic. There's so much of it. Like, it just blows me away that this was something that he was able to accomplish with or without help.
Yeah, I mean, they are really well crafted sunflower seeds. When you look at a detail shot of one of the seeds, they do look like real sunflower seeds. And when you look at the installation, you're right, they take on this other quality. It almost looks like, you know, if you squint, it would look like a deep shag carpet or something like that.
Yeah.
Like there's something about just this vast field of just like little specks and everything like that. It becomes a sort of abstraction, and just the scale of it is really, really impressive. And in the Tate, it was in this really industrial building.
Yeah,
it feels like a warehouse.
Yeah, so, as someone that works at a warehouse, that makes up. That lines up.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels sort of industrial. It feels like this is like honestly, it feels like the storehouse for something that's going to be packed up for distribution later.
Right. I mean, and just like seeing like it's incredible as well, like, you know, for some of the pieces, like some of the photos I'm seeing to go with this, like he just has like the people, like kids or whatnot, just like on the ground, like with these seeds or whatnot, like, which makes me curious and almost like wondering, did one of those kids accidentally mistake that as like real sunflower seeds and try to accidentally eat it thinking that it was food or something?
Well, one of the things I find really funny is there was like an art collective that when this was installed in the Tate, they took slingshots, and like four groups or four people from this art group just took a slingshot and just launched 4 real sunflower seeds into the pile of 100 million hand-painted porcelain sunflower seeds. And they put up a little sign saying seeds on seeds or something like that.
Oh.
Which, like, it seems so funny on some level. And another sort of permutation of this, there was a smaller like gallery exhibition space called Danson's House.
Okay.
They were doing an art show on consumerism and international trade and all of that sort of stuff. They asked for people to send in the sunflower seeds that they stole from Ai Weiwei's installation at the Tate, because we all know that many tiny little pieces, maybe you thought it was something you could walk by and grab, like a Felix Gonzalez Torres thing. Maybe you just realized like there's no way anyone's counting all of these, but it was understood some are going to go missing. You know?
Yeah. I mean,
they got like 10 pounds of them.
Oh my God. I mean, to be fair, like I'm a person that has gone to a few, you know, art museums here and there or whatnot. There's just always that urge to like want to like touch and get up close with like the art piece and like truly get to admire it. And especially whenever it's something as simple, like in the mind, something that looks as simple as sunflower seeds. It's like, there's 100 million sunflower seeds here. 1 or 2 of them going missing is not going to break the exhibit. So I can understand where they're coming from. I don't endorse it, but I understand where they're coming from.
No, well, and like I said, there's legitimate confusion because some art you're intended to interact with and some art you're not. Like some stuff you're like I said, Felix Gonzalez Torres is a great example. He had unlimited edition stacked prints that you could, just walk out with, and other stuff you get within a foot of and an alarm goes off. Like it's a minefield in the art world, in the museums.
Right.
But this piece, from what I read, like from people who actually like handled and transported it, they were just like, we knew stuff's gonna go missing. As long as you get about the right number there, it still is gonna have the same impact. Like you said, when you've got 100 million of these, nobody notices the difference between 100 million and 99,999,998.
Right.
Like it's still just a massive, overwhelming amount of seeds in there.
Right.
And I gotta say, like, as much as I've enjoyed talking about Ai Weiwei and his narrative and the ideas behind his piece, the ideas that drive his work, as I do, like, when I was doing just a cold read on this work, because I always like to start off with just my initial gut reactions and interpretations. We talked about how it becomes this field of seeds. You compared it to gravel and me to a shag carpet. It becomes like something else that as I look at it, I want to touch it. I want to interact with it. But at the same time, it becomes this sea of gray dots and bumps that on some level, without the background knowledge of the personal connections and how it relates to the Communist Party propaganda and all of the clever things he was doing there, just like my lizard brain looks at this and I'm just like, meh, okay. That's a lot of seeds. I can respect the craftsmanship. I can respect the work that went into it. But just as a visual piece, I'm not feeling it.
I mean, to be fair, I think that what you're talking about kind of might be what he could be going for in a sense. Just kind of one of those like, I don't know. At least for me, like I'm looking at this, thinking about what you're talking about. And it's one of those like, the spectacle of 100 million handcrafted porcelain seeds. After a while, again, you just kind of look at it as a whole and you're just thinking to yourself like, wow, that's just a lot. Like, it's just a lot. It's not, it's not some like gorgeous Greek sculpture trying to convey like a model or something like that. But that's also kind of what I might be trying to go for in a way. Do you kind of get what I'm getting at?
I do. And I think this is why I struggled with it. And this is why, if I'm being honest, this is probably why I avoided it for a long time. Because I kind of knew I'd have to get to this at some point because Ai Weiwei and this specific piece is on the American, for American high school students, the AP Art History required works list. So this is one of those things that kids across the U.S. at least are learning about.
Right.
And I want to make stuff that's a resource that's valuable for them. But I look at this, I always like to talk about work that I really enjoy. And this one, I like it on the conceptual level. I'm not digging it on the visual.
Right.
But then as I learn more, I find more that I appreciate. But I just look at this and I'm like, well, how is that different than going to a farm and looking in their silo?
Well, I mean, that's fair. I mean, for some artists, like it is about the visual itself. But I feel like, especially, since we've been talking about the way that he likes to go about this stuff is not just for the visual aspect of it, but a lot more with like the backstory and the meaning behind it. He's more of I feel like his pieces are more or less statement pieces more than they are visual spectacles more than anything else. So like, as much as I'd love to find some way to, absolutely gawk at, a field of gray seeds or whatnot, hearing that backstory or more or less gives me the full appreciation of this art piece more than anything else. Cause I mean, like, I'm sure if anyone can dedicate themselves. They can make 100 million of anything, but congratulations, you make 100 million of something. But like, what's the purpose behind it? Like, he's trying to make like this strong statement concerning, something that we teased at a little earlier. He's trying to make that strong statement talking about like his home, how he grew up, what he was forced to deal with, how he suffered in certain circumstances, and with the different influences and the different backstories or whatnot. Like with this one, like again, I'd love to talk about something gorgeous about it, but I think at the end of the day, he's more focused on trying to make sure that the statement he's trying to say is the loudest thing possible of this piece.
Fair enough. I think that's good. Anything else you want to say about it before we wrap it up?
I just have the one thing that I noticed, because whenever I was like quickly peeking at Weiwei's art pieces or whatnot, like this is probably a good example of it, but like a lot of his pieces are like huge that I've noticed. Like he likes to really like take up as much space as possible when possible. Do you think like that's how much do you think of that as like intentional? Like how much of that is like he needs the space in order to tell the statement, or he has this space and he's going to use as much of it to tell that statement?
I feel like a lot of it is probably because scale affects audience perception. When you make something that is on that monumental scale, people have to stop and take notice, and because his work is so conceptual, you need that scale, that monumentality to it's kind of yelling at the viewer saying, hey, pay attention to me right now. I've got something important, and it is so important. I'm doing it on this massive scale, Yeah. It's a billboard instead of a flyer.
Yeah. There you go. That's probably the best way we could probably explain his work more than anything else.
I'm wrapping it up. I want just a 3-point rating scale. And where should this hang? The Louvre? Is this something to look at? The lab? Is this something to learn from? Or the Louvre? British for bastard.
Yeah,
there's a poop joke in there somewhere.
Oh, that's terrible.
I think this might be an interesting statement. I believe like this piece is a piece for the public more than anything else. Considering the fact that, like I said, what we've talked about with trying to make whatever statement or whatnot, this should be something that should be out there in front of people's faces and letting people know, hey, this is what's going on. I believe that's what I would probably try to, I believe that's what he would want to showcase with this piece more than anything else.
Yeah, so it seems like a museum piece for public display, public consumption. I buy that. I actually feel like this is, for my mind, this is more of a lab piece, just because it's the ideas that I find so interesting. Conceptual art, the idea is the art. If I were looking at this purely in the aesthetics, I would say it would be kind of a boring piece to me. But because of the backstory, because of the richness of that, because he's got so much to say, I feel like this is one for me to learn from, even though if I'm being totally honest, which I have been throughout, I don't really like it. It's the eat your vegetables of art.
Yeah. That is a great description. Also, I just want to say for the public idea, like the going to museums, I just had a funny thought. It would be probably the most convenient piece in order to get to several different museums and whatnot, because you could just take like a couple million, just put it this museum, a couple million in that museum.
Oh, I can't imagine that though, because think about how much all of that would weigh.
Oh, you're right. Well, think about how much 100 million alone weighs. I mean,
well, 100 million of anything, but like a porcelain piece, like you're talking clay, like that's a heavy material.
Yep.
Because yeah, kudos to him on getting all of that done and getting it all transported. And kudos to him, like I said, for having the guts to put out this work, because as we've alluded to in his personal narrative, he has been imprisoned for a period and faced serious backlash, and I don't think we even said why.
No.
I don't want to get into the graphic details of this, but basically he was calling out some corruption in the government. The story, as I understand it, is accusations that people were skimming off the top and taking shortcuts in construction of buildings, and notably a school that caused it to collapse, and thousands were sort of missing or killed as a result of that. And he was agitating publicly about that, raising consciousness about it. So, he is one who has acted, from everything I understand, acted nobly, not agitating for the sake of agitating, but because of important human rights issues. And that has not gone over well, but he has been willing to suffer the consequences for doing the right thing and calling attention to that. So tip of the hat on that.
Yeah, all the credit in the world to him for being brave enough to be able to stand up and actually say what needs to be said in this kind of government, instead of, just kind of sitting back and idling by and just letting people admire his art. Like, the fact that he's willing to put himself out there and say what needs to be said is a bold thing that we need more of in this world.
Yeah, and I think it's cool that he does this in so many different ways, whether it is through 100 million seeds thrown on the floor of a warehouse, or a heavy metal song and music video as protest.
Or having like the Olympic Stadium, the one that everyone in the world is going to see, not just for 2008, but for years on end, and letting everyone know, yeah, this is a toilet seat.
And yeah, I feel like on some level I should have done that, because it would have been perfect for the final segment to say that in the loo.
Smart.
And I have nothing better to end this on other than to say thank you very much once again, my guest this week, Nathan, host of the Postmodern Art Podcast.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyle, for giving me this opportunity and introducing me to an incredible artist. I now have a new dream guest. I don't know how successful I'd be to get him, but I'd love to just crack into his mind and talk about this stuff, because this is interesting. So thank you so much for introducing me to an incredible artist today.
Thank you once again. And I will, of course, link your podcast in my show notes for anyone who's interested in checking out the Postmodern Art Podcast.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.